Burning issues, navigating the future of wildfire policy. The threat of wildfire is present nationwide. Recent tragedies in Hawaii, California, and South Carolina right now as we speak highlight the urgent need to examine this important issue. My thoughts continue to stay with families impacted by these disasters. And of course, I am praying for the people of South Carolina at this critical time. We will support them during this emergency without condition. FEMA was created in the 1970s to respond to hurricanes and floods on the East Coast. In recent years, the threat wildfire poses to homes and communities has increased exponentially, but FEMA's programs have not adapted to the challenges created by wildfire. This roundtable will create a roadmap for the policies my subcommittee should pursue to bring FEMA's wildfire programs up to par. I'm disappointed that this committee's Republicans have not yet scheduled a hearing to examine the effectiveness of FEMA's programs before, during, or after the fire following the Lahaina and Los Angeles disasters. Instead, the Trump administration and many Republicans have threatened to dismantle FEMA and condition disaster relief. Rather than help wildfire victims in California get back to their feet, President Trump and Elon Musk are wreaking havoc at FEMA by firing hundreds of critical employees, compromising disaster survival's personal data, and freezing grant payments. These actions are dangerous and they are unacceptable. Elected officials have a responsibility to help their constituents rebuild their lives after disasters. Conditioning aid to states, something the Trump administration has threatened, also has dangerous consequences. This can slow down necessary life-saving assistance to our fellow Americans. It can open the door to retaliatory practices, and it's simply nonsensical. We know that FEMA is tapped after states reach their capacity and cannot respond to disaster. We shouldn't condition aid for these California wildfires, just like we shouldn't condition aid for the fires in South Carolina happening right now. That is not and never has been the role of elected officials. We need to safeguard disaster aid to make sure it is reaching the people who need it most. And I want to thank our witnesses and my colleagues for taking the time to be here today to participate in this important discussion. Our panelists on panel one are three representatives who their districts and the people of the districts were hard hit by the wildfires in California. The Honorable Brad Sherman, the Honorable Laura Friedman, and the Honorable Judy Chu, and her guest Diane Lewis, who's here today. Thank you for being here and being an advocate for your community. And then after the panel of our congressional colleagues is done, we'll have a second panel with experts in disaster management, fire management, including Supervisor Patrice Horseman from Coconino County in Arizona. Great to see you, my friend, and always being an advocate for Arizona and mountain country in the Flagstaff area. With that, I think we're going to open it up to comments by our colleagues to start out with, and then we'll have a few questions. Jared Huffman, who is the ranking member of the Environment Natural Resources Subcommittee, is here as well. And so I have no particular order. Do we have a particular order? Congressman Sherman, you start us off.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for putting this together. I'm known as Brad Sherman from California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. 2 years ago, they added to my district the Pacific Palisades and all the surrounding areas that were affected by the fire. Before the fire started, NOAA warned us that we were going to have significant winds. Gavin Newsom deployed well over half of Northern California's firefighting aircraft and 100 fire companies down to Southern California before the first spark. Don't let them abolish NOAA. On January 7th, we saw dozens of fires. Most of them were put out. 2 of them tragically were major. We've seen what AccuWeather estimates is $275 billion in damage. President Trump, in his inaugural address, said that these fires hit us without even a token of defense. And obviously, our firefighters took great offense to that. The Palisades fire, 23,000 acres, 7,000 buildings destroyed. The Eaton fire, you'll hear from Judy about, even bigger in some ways. I'd like to give you a little quick picture of the best and the worst of American government. Within 2 days, they took over the West Side Pavilion, a huge shopping center that is, now has other purposes. They set up tables for 70 different government agencies, all in 2 days. But we live in a country where if you're hit by a fire, you might have to talk to 70 different government agencies. Our government was designed by our founders who split power into so many different fragments, and then we fragmented further. Donald Trump came to my district. He came and he announced that he wanted to abolish FEMA. First, that's terrible employee management. I got these guys and women working 12 hours a day helping my people, and he says he wants to fire all of them and abolish their district. But second, it's absolutely absurd to think that, as the president proposed, the federal government should write the checks and every state should have the response capacity on their own. We couldn't do that in California, let alone Rhode Island. For example, there are 28 search and rescue teams sent to North Carolina. So they're supposed to have 28 teams on their payroll 24/7, 365 until some disaster hits that one particular state. They fired the probationary FEMA employees with 1 or 2 years. They gave a fork in the road. This is undercutting FEMA's ability to respond. Don't abolish FEMA, but there's some changes. First and foremost, statute has to provide that people have at least 180 days to apply for aid. The current rule says they have 60 days. I've sent a dozen emails to all my people, and then I talked to Judy and her friend, and I find out that so many people over the age of 95 are not reading my emails. And a lot of people do not know and cannot know whether they even qualify, since they don't know whether their insurance company will come through. Yet, I've begged FEMA's office to extend the March 10 deadline. They haven't done so. All members from California, Democrat and Republican, thank you, signed the letter to FEMA and to the SBA urging that this deadline be extended to December 31. Second, FEMA provides a grant to rebuild your home if you're totally uninsured as high as $43,600. That will not rebuild a mobile home. That number should be bigger. And I think it should go through FEMA, and you should double or triple that amount. What is traditionally done is instead a separate CDBG program is administered by state and local authorities. That is what our governor is requesting. Whether it comes from this agency or that agency doesn't matter a lot, but FEMA's already writing checks. I support the governor's proposal. Conditions are outrageous. Should those of us from California vote against hurricane victims in Louisiana and tell them to sleep on their cousin's couch until Louisiana changes its abortion law? I am opposed to Louisiana's abortion law every bit as much as the president doesn't like our voter registration laws in California. One thing that's rumored as a condition is, hey, we want to make sure that when you rebuild, it doesn't all burn down again. We will do that because we passed a law in 2008. Everything built after that date in the Palisades has got to meet the new fireproofing standards. We know these standards work because in Paradise in Northern California, huge fire, 58% of those that met the standard survived. Only 18% of the homes that didn't meet the standard survived. Water was not an issue. This has nothing to do with the smelt. We have plenty of water in LA County. Somebody took a long shower during the fire, no problem. The problem is getting the water pumped up the hill in the Palisades. That has nothing to do with the quantity of water in LA County. And thank you, Northern California, for sending us a bunch, although this water tends to come from the Colorado. Finally, the president should not be firing federal firefighters and those engaged in vegetation management. What are we trying to do? Have another one of these or several more? I think that concludes my remarks. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Sherman, for providing information and your leadership for your residents during this very, very challenging time. Next up will be Congresswoman Friedman, but first, Congresswoman Brownlee has attended as well, so thank you for being here. I'm getting a little nervous with so many California members surrounding me at this time. Congresswoman Friedman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Stanton, for organizing this opportunity to discuss the wildfires. My district is the 30th Congressional District. Just as I'm sitting here sandwiched between my two wonderful colleagues, my district is sandwiched between their districts. We were luckily spared the devastation that we saw, even though we did have fires. None of them, luckily, caused the kind of damage that we saw around us. But everyone in Los Angeles has been affected by these fires. When tens of thousands of people lose their homes, everybody, and I mean everyone, knows someone who's lost their house. And the people of Los Angeles have responded. They have been giving their money, they have been giving items, they've been giving rooms in their house to fire victims. Just as people in Los Angeles have stood up for their neighbors, we in California expect our neighboring states to stand up, to stand with us, because we are the United States of America. So let's talk about FEMA. Now, FEMA has approved almost $80 million in aid to LA County residents, including $15 million for housing assistance and $64 million in other needs assistance, with just under 150,000 residents applying for assistance, to give you the scope of the issue. Over 904 households have utilized transitional sheltering assistance, and disaster survival assistance staff has interacted with over 21,000 survivors. Unfortunately, in the last few weeks, at least 1,000 FEMA employees, as far as we know, have been fired or quit because of instructions given to them by Elon Musk, including more than a dozen senior employees in leadership roles. At least 7 of these are members responsible for managing disaster recovery operations, workers who are extremely valuable and already in short supply. According to the Government Accountability Office, FEMA was already understaffed before the Trump administration made these sweeping layoffs. As disasters hit more and more because of climate change around the country, we are seeing more and more of these giant-scale natural disasters. Cutting FEMA is complete insanity. And we know that President Trump, as you heard, wants to eliminate FEMA altogether, which is fiscally irresponsible for every state to stand up their own disaster recovery, even if they don't know when they're going, or if they're going to have a huge disaster. Now, holding California's aid hostage for conditions is not leadership. It is simply playing political games with the lives of American families. I also want to point out that in 2022, California's paid $83 billion more in federal taxes than we got back. We are not asking North or South Carolina to send us their tax money. We are not asking Arizona to send us their tax money. We are simply asking to keep some of our own tax money in our time of need. Why should California be treated differently than any other state because we happen to vote blue more often? That is antithetical to being a nation of united states, and it is not the way to treat your neighbor. When Louisiana needed help, we sent help without any conditions. When Florida needed help, we acted without condition. I will not stand for conditions for North or South Carolina in their time of need, and I would hope that more of our Republican colleagues stand with us in our time of need. I have worked over the years when I was in the state legislature on numerous bills to help California be more fire resilient. The narrative that California has done nothing about fire resiliency is demonstratively false. We have defensible space requirements. We have forest management policies that align now with the latest and greatest recommendations as to how we should treat forests and brush clearance. I have done bills myself successfully that were bipartisan to increase cultural and controlled burns in California. If you go to the Tahoe region, you will see forest management in action. Southern California doesn't have giant forests that have started these fires. They have brush, which is very difficult to manage, but we have local firefighting agencies that do just that on a daily basis. So we have put billions of dollars into resiliency, including local bond measures. So we have been doing as much as we know how to fight fires, and we will continue to do that. And again, I want to thank all of the firefighters. I want to thank the Republicans who have stood up to say they are against aid. And I certainly want to commend Judy Chu and Brad Sherman for the incredible work that they are doing for their constituents in their time of need. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that powerful testimony. And I was remiss to mention that I'm the ranking member of the subcommittee overseeing FEMA, and you're the vice ranking member, so we're working closely together. It used to be a relatively sleepy committee, FEMA, and public buildings, both of which are now very hot issues with this, unfortunately, for all the wrong reasons with this current administration. Next up will be Judy Chu, the Honorable Judy Chu, who represents the 28th District of California, and I know your district was particularly hard hit by these wildfires, so thank you for your testimony today and your guests as well.
Thank you, Ranking Member Stanton, for inviting me to participate in today's Wildfire Roundtable. My district in Southern California has been completely devastated by the Eaton fire. In Altadena and in northern Pasadena, the fire took 17 of our neighbors' lives. It destroyed over 9,500 structures. It left 20,000 people homeless, and it burned churches, schools, businesses, and community institutions to the ground. Places that served as safe havens for generations of Angelenos and where community was built across the San Gabriel Valley are now unrecognizable, and it's like the apocalypse over there. When Black Americans fled racial segregation in the Jim Crow South and came to Los Angeles, many made Altadena their home because there was no redlining that prevented them from obtaining home loans. It has remained a center of Black culture and civic life in Los Angeles. Altadena has also been a hub of the creative community in Southern California, where so many working-class artists came because they could afford to buy homes, build studio spaces, and collaborate. But entire lives were shattered as thousands of people lost everything they had worked for: homes, cherished belongings, and irreplaceable memories. They are people like Diane Lewis, who's my guest at the State of the Union tonight. And she lost her Altadena home of 29 years, the home that, as a widowed mother, she raised her 2 children. That terrible night of January 7th, she fled her home with only her dog and 1 change of clothes. She returned to find her entire home burned and all the memories with it, all her children's pictures and her mother's ashes. And now she is homeless. Diane is a reflection, though, of the wonderful people of Altadena. She's a distinguished educator of many years with 2 master's degrees and now is the CEO of a nonprofit that works to empower underserved youth. That is why it's even more tragic that the 17 people that lost their lives in this fire were all from West Altadena, mostly Black, and many elderly or disabled, and they suffered from delayed evacuation notices, which is another issue we have to address. Now, the communities I represent face a long and challenging process to recover from unimaginable tragedy. They are trying to rebuild their homes, navigate insurance issues, recover lost documents, and keep themselves and their families housed and safe. Partnerships across every level of government will be essential for our communities to rebuild. The assistance provided through FEMA and other federal programs has been nothing short of life-saving, delivering over $80 million already in direct relief to affected households, providing temporary housing for thousands of people who lost their homes, and operating disaster recovery centers all day, every day, for survivors to speak with local, state, and federal agencies above their needs. But we must extend the deadline for signing up for FEMA, which is March 10th. Diane's neighbors are 96 years old and 99 years old, and they do not use email or the internet. And they have not yet signed up or are familiar with FEMA. We must give them time to sign up. And we will need more federal resources for our long-term recovery, which is why California has already submitted a request for supplemental disaster appropriations, just as North Carolina has done for ongoing needs after Hurricane Helene. And yet scores of Republicans, led by President Trump and Speaker Johnson, are threatening to place conditions on disaster assistance for California's victims. At the same time, Elon Musk and the Trump administration are executing mass layoffs of hundreds of federal employees at FEMA and other agencies responsible for helping these wildfire survivors rebuild their lives. Threatening to withhold federal aid from wildfire victims while gutting the agencies they rely on is heartless and counterproductive and will make it even harder for people to recover. As with every catastrophic natural disaster that's destroyed an American community in our history, I look forward to working with congressional leadership and the president to pass a supplemental disaster package to address these wildfires with no strings attached. This package will provide an injection of desperately needed federal aid for rebuilding homes, businesses, and community institutions, which will support the healing process for those suffering the grief and trauma of losing loved ones, homes, and every belonging they cherished. Wildfires have no political affiliation, and as Americans, we don't turn our backs on our neighbors in need or punish them for political differences. We lift them up and support them in their restoration, recovery, and healing. So thank you again, Ranking Member Stanton and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your support in the fight to secure critical disaster relief funding that's necessary for Altadena and northern Pasadena to recover and rebuild.
Thank you all three for your amazing advocacy for your constituents. It's an incredibly difficult and challenging time, and we look forward to working with you on this issue of lengthening the time for people who can sign up. That is such a reasonable and fair request under the circumstances. And Judy, to you, I know you've suffered other tragedies in your district, including gun violence, and your leadership has been exemplary, so thank you. Ms. Lewis, you are not a member of Congress, but you're here. Is there anything you'd like to add for we should know as members of Congress that you've experienced?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me, and I appreciate Judy inviting me. I just want to say a little bit about myself. I started out as a classroom teacher, an elementary teacher. So I worked through school and got my master's, and then I lost my husband at the early age of 42. And I moved to Altadena because I thought it was a safe community to be in, to raise 2 children alone. That is my purpose. Now, I've worked for LA Unified School District teaching other people's children for 44 years. I've been in every possible position in the school district. Taking care of children, that's what I do. And there are still some of them that are adults that are still in my lives because of the influence that I had on them. What's bothering me about this the most is my church had 120 families that lost their homes in one church. That was my church. The other part that bothers me a great deal is there was no water in the fire hydrants. The firemen didn't come on our block. We're just as confused by that as we could possibly be, because I know I pay my taxes, so I don't understand that at all. But the other thing that has happened is FEMA is in various places throughout the city. And Altadena is an older professional community of retired doctors, lawyers, teachers, ministers, grandparents, all kinds of people. Have they stopped using the technology that we're using? Yes, they have. Are they keeping up with the email that FEMA has moved from Pasadena City College over to Woodbury? No, they haven't. If it moved, they would know that it has moved because they're not getting their emails. We have people in the community that have been in that community all their life. There was a lady that was 99 years old, and her great-great-granddaughter had to make her leave her house. Her great-great-granddaughter, not her granddaughter, not her daughter, because she said most of her sons were gone in death. Her great-great-granddaughter, and she has no insurance. And she's been living there over 50 years. How do we help her rebuild? I asked her, had she signed up for FEMA? What is that? There are still people in that community that still don't have the knowledge and the know-how to navigate the system of what to do to take care of their homes. I myself have friends that work in housing, and I was in education, so I know how to ask questions. I know how to call city councilmen. I know how to call congresspeople. I know how to get on the phone. Not everybody at a certain age. All of you in here know that we all age. And you know that all at a point when we age, there are certain things that we stop doing in our lives. And one of those things is we tend to not get on the computer much anymore, particularly if we did it younger. Why bother? Because your grandchildren or your children are taking care of all those things. So that's what's happening in that community right now. The other thing I want to just share with you is, and I don't want to run out of time.
One more. You got time for one quick one. I appreciate that.
Okay. If we do this, we have to be fair. I've been very much an advocate between the two cities, your city over at Palisades, because there was a lot of going back and forth that Palisades was getting more than Altadena because Altadena was an African-American community and we weren't. Well, I got in my car and drove to your mall and drove to UCLA, and so I know that we're getting the same kinds of things. But if you don't know how to apply for them, if you don't know where to go get those resources, if you don't know the questions to ask, you're not going to get them. We need to provide these people with financial stability. We need to help them rebuild, whether they were insured, underinsured, need help with the insurance, match it up. We send it to everybody else. We send everybody on this earth money out of the country. My tax dollars, I know that some of my money has to be going somewhere. I'm not getting all of it. So I'm just saying, I appreciate it if you take into consideration what we've been through. And no, we were not alert about the fire the same way everybody else was.
All right. Thank you so much. That was great. That was impromptu. You didn't know you were going to speak, but I asked because you're here and you're a guest of Congresswoman Chu, and you have a very important story to tell, and we need to hear it. So thank you for your testimony. Thanks to the testimony of all of our colleagues, and again, your really wonderful leadership for your constituents during this incredibly difficult and painful time. So thanks for your leadership, and we're listening to you. It's important. Thank you so much. And I think we're going to do a quick video and then in the next panel? No, just roll right to the next panel. Okay, roll right to the next panel.
Okay, I'll do that. Now, our part is done.
Thank you again. Diane, it's going to be a long night.
Pardon me?
It's going to be a long night.
So I hear. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, next, I think we're setting up with the placards for the names. We have experts who are going to provide important testimony about the emergency management system and how we can improve it, particularly for forest fires. We are joined by Dr. Laura Moore-Morell former U.S. Fire Administrator at FEMA. My friend, Supervisor from Coconino County, Patrice Horseman, great to see you. County of Sonoma Department of Emergency Management Director Jeff Duvall, and Deputy Chief Justin Green of Loudoun County Fire and Rescue. We've been joined by one more member of Congress, Salud Carbajal, also a member of the T&I Committee, also of California. Thank you for coming. And so without further ado, we're just going down the order. Okay. Dr. Moore Morrell, great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Push this so you can hear me. Thank you, sir, and thank you very much for hosting this. I certainly want to recognize the lives lost and those changed in the LA and other wildfires and the firefighters who responded as well. The devastating fires in Los Angeles demonstrate that we as a nation are at best in denial and at worst oblivious to the threat of fire in our communities across the nation. Truly learning from this tragedy will require spending our limited resources on solutions that will actually address the problem. The California fires are not novel. We saw the same thing in urban-suburban conflagration in Lahaina, Maui in 2023, in Colorado in 2021, where small grass fires ignite structures, and then the structures broadcast embers to the next and the next until thousands of homes are burned to the ground and lives are destroyed. Today, we're in response mode. In other words, when a fire occurs, we expect that firefighters are going to respond quickly, have water available, stop the fire from spreading to the point of disaster. However, that expectation is no longer viable. There are not enough firefighters in the nation for the current state of the fire threat. Firefighters are responding and performing with every ounce of training, skill, knowledge, and ability, and they are fighting unwinnable fights against monster fires that are unstoppable. The solution is to change the risk environment. These changes require action from individuals and policymakers. The question is, are we as a nation paying attention beyond the moment, beyond the horrid photos of burned out neighborhoods? Are we comprehending fully that this fire is not a once-in-a-century occurrence? Are we fully comprehending that the same devastation can and will occur again? The only question is when and where. The solutions that reduce the likelihood that another LA fire scenario can occur are attainable. To be clear, continuing to spend billions of dollars on federal, state, and local tax dollars attempting to treat vegetative fuels and controlled wildfires in the forested areas is not the solution for protecting communities. Our firefighters know it will not work. Our insurance industry knows that will not work. Why? Because the most devastating ignitions are starting in the communities, in the interface, not in the deep forested areas. Over the last decade, wind-driven fire has caused 88% of the loss in communities. And according to the University of Colorado at Boulder, the number of structures destroyed by wildfire in the western United States has gone up a whopping 246%. For decades, Congress and the White House has enabled the U.S. Forest Service to claim community wildfire risk and the problems that accompany it, and to offer a solution consisting of fuel treatment to reduce the intensity before a fire reaches a community, in the hope that it's going to slow the fire and limit the impact. We have to come to a resolution that hope is not a strategy. Forest treatment activities do not scale, nor will they ever, to the expansive fire-prone area bordering communities. As a nation, we continue to build communities in the path of fire, many with one road in and one road out, exacerbating the risk to those who choose to live there. And as long as Congress and other state and local policymakers define the problem as wildland fire or wildfire in forested areas, as a nation, we're going to continue to lose communities to wildfire. Even now, the Fix Our Forest Act that has passed the House, authorizing tree cutting on public lands, this bill is laudable for what it is, but it's more legacy strategies that are failing us. The bill must be expanded to look at the risk in communities. If we expect or depend on the U.S. Forest Service and the Department of Interior alone to solve the threat of wildfire in communities, we're going to continue to have destruction because we're bringing the wrong solution to the problem at hand. The solution is an all-hands approach to reducing the risk and becoming fire adapting in our communities. There is another bill introduced by Senator Padilla and others called to establish a unified national wildfire intelligence center. This bill excludes DHS, FEMA, and the U.S. Fire Administration, and they manage the main source of response data for all fires. So these bills have to recognize who's actually leading in the wildfire space in communities. As a nation, we have to recognize that we can't expect to get rid of fire on our landscape. Wind-driven, extreme wildfires are inevitable, but they don't have to be disasters. We have to remember that FEMA is before, during, and after. And we have to build resilient communities to fire code. Congress and state governments can support strategic, durable investments, reduce risk, and increase insurability to prevent disastrous home and community loss. And policing vegetation in forests alone will not help communities. Understanding how to live with inevitable wildfire is key to survival of our communities across our nation. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for that outstanding testimony and the reminder of the complete role of FEMA. Sometimes you get typecast, it's just after the disaster.
Yes.
Thank you. Next to speak will be Coconino County Supervisor Patrice Horseman, representing the Flagstaff area in northern Arizona. Great to see you, and thanks for your leadership. Go ahead.
Absolutely, thank you. Ranking Member Stanton, distinguished members of this committee, thank you for inviting me to participate in this vital discussion. My name is Patrice Horseman. I serve as the County Supervisor in Coconino County, Arizona. I'm honored to be here on behalf of the National Association of Counties. Before I continue, I want to personally recognize and thank Representative Stanton for his leadership on wildfire response and for consistently looking for ways to improve, strengthen, and create a more efficient FEMA. FEMA is critical for us to serve our communities in times of disaster. In the previous Congress, Representative Stanton, alongside Congressman Doug LaMalfa, introduced the Wildfire Response Improvement Act, a significant effort towards improving our nation's wildfire preparedness and fire response, and I hope it will be reintroduced in the 119th Congress. I want to particularly highlight the awareness of the public safety risks associated with post-fire events, such as severe and repetitive flooding. Representative Stanton's advocacy for revisiting the Public Assistance Program Policy Guide to extend disaster relief eligibility for counties facing repeated flooding events that extend beyond the current 72-hour harmful incident period is invaluable to rural America. In Coconino County, we face these dual threats of wildfires and post-wildfire flooding, which pose significant challenges to our residents and our infrastructure. Over the past decade, Coconino County, our county, has experienced 9 major wildfires, resulting in the tragic loss of 63 homes. 3 of these fires have led to severe, reoccurring floods, which unfortunately caused the death of a 12-year-old girl, impacted over 2,000 private properties, causing 2 major highways to close for extended periods of time, and caused significant damage to local infrastructure. The federal disaster relief we received, which exceeded $143 million, has been essential to help us recover. Without it, the consequences to our residents, businesses, and infrastructure would have been catastrophic. But even with this funding, the total cost to the county is over $65 million, more than 6 times the annual budget for the Coconino County Flood Control District. After a wildfire impacts a watershed, our experience in Coconino County shows the post-wildfire floods are 10 to 31 times greater. While the FEMA Public Assistance Program can fund projects that restore infrastructure to pre-incident conditions, the flexibility to upgrade and adapt infrastructure to post-wildfire watershed conditions is important to safeguard local resources and ensure wise fiscal management and investment of recovery funds. The impacts from national disasters are not unique to Coconino County. Roughly 900 counties representing almost 1/3 of all counties, experience at least one presidentially declared disaster each year. Many of these are for wildfire. The increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters are placing immense pressure on counties. The impacts not only our operation and resources, but our ability to serve our communities and to support our local economies. Counties are not just stakeholders. We are essential partners in the federal, state, local collaboration necessary to ensure that communities can respond and recover efficiently and effectively. To that end, any policy changes impacting the existing federal disaster system must be in consultation with county government. NACO recently launched an intergovernmental disaster reform task force that will spend the next year examining the suite of federal disaster assistance programs, providing recommendations for reform, and shining a light on the critical role county plays in disaster response, recovery, and mitigation. Through this intergovernmental partnership, this group seeks to partner with our federal champions to improve federal disaster systems. I look forward to the conversation today, any questions you might have, and certainly, as I said, Arizona stands with California.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Supervisor, for your friendship and leadership, and you've done the counties well here today. Next is Sonoma County Department of Emergency Management Director Jeff Duvall.
Good afternoon, Ranking Member Stanton. Jeff Duvall, Director for the Sonoma County Department of Emergency Management, on behalf of the International Association of Emergency Managers. Thank you for the opportunity today. Sonoma County is no stranger to disasters and emergencies. Since 2017, the county has had 6 local disasters, 8 federally proclaimed disasters, and 2 state disasters, ranging from fires to floods to a pandemic, power shutoff events from the public utilities during red flag conditions. It's been back-to-back in Sonoma County. Unfortunately, the tragedy of the 2017 wildfires is what brought change to our county, as several other counties in California and several other states have seen to make that call to change the way we deliver emergency management. Disasters today are much more cascading than they were 5, 10, and 15 years ago. They have much more bigger consequences that come with them. Just a flood in my county during the winter months raises the Russian River to flood levels, but at the same time, we've got 60 to 80 mile an hour winds, wind chill, frost on the roads, and power lines go out. Sonoma County is not alone as we go through these changes in climate effect, as you've heard from others today here. We need to lean forward, work with our state and our federal partners when we have these disasters, and bring everyone to the table to make sure that we have coordination and collaboration to help our community. With that, as we move forward in the world of emergency management, there's a lot of unknowns right now. There's a lot on the profession of emergency management. As I mentioned, it's a lot different from 5 to 10, 15 years ago. The expectation from the community is different. As you heard today, alert and warning is different. The expectation from the community is that alert right away with clear direction of what to do, what's going on, and where to go. It's how you implement those programs and how you implement those guidelines. Fortunately, Sonoma County got that wake-up call in 2017, and we've been a huge advocate for reform of emergency management on local programs and have been a leader in the alert and warning space since then. And we've worked with our partners throughout the U.S. to share our story and our experiences with them. With that, the message today is the emergency management profession needs to keep pushing forward, but we also need to have a space at the table as reform moves forward with FEMA. The important message to remember, as you've heard my colleague to my right say, is disasters happen on the lowest level, on the local level of government, and that's counties and the cities, and that's who we represent. So with that, thank you.
Thank you very much for that important testimony, and these are uncertain times, particularly at the local level, about whether the federal government will be a full partner in emergency management. Unfortunately, that's at risk because of the statements from this administration suggesting FEMA may go away or be defunded to a significant extent. So that is an important point for us to acknowledge. Next up is Deputy Chief Justin Green of Loudoun County Fire and Rescue. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, Ranking Member Stanton. I'm Justin Green, the Deputy Chief for Communications and Technology Support Services for Loudoun County Fire and Rescue. Today, I'm representing the International Association of Fire Chiefs. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the future of wildfire policy. As the tragic wildfires in Lahaina and Maui in 2023, and recently in Los Angeles demonstrated, the nation faces a serious and growing wildfire problem. This problem is most pressing in the wildland-urban interface, where there is greater population density and more potential for disaster. Just to demonstrate the scope of the problem, please consider these statistics. The 10-year average for acres burned by wildland fires is at least 7 million acres per year. In addition, just the federal government spent almost $3.2 billion in 2023 on wildland fire suppression. By comparison, the federal government spent only $239.9 million in 1985. Wildfires are not just a Western problem. We see them across the nation, even in Virginia this weekend, and recently, today, as you mentioned, in North and South Carolina. The cooperation of federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments and private landowners can help address this problem. We know that the adoption of defensible space measures, building codes requiring fire-resistant materials, and effective fire response can help save lives and property. The hard part is incentivizing everyone to work together to address the problem. The IFC is committed to the National Wildland Fire Cohesive Strategy as a framework to collaborate to address the wildfire problem. We also supported the recommendations of the 2023 congressionally created Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission. While the House has passed the Fix Our Forests Act, H.R. 471, more can be done to help the nation adapt to the wildland fire challenge. The IFC recommends that the Trump administration and Congress take the following actions. All jurisdictions should participate in making and implementing risk-based wildfire decisions. To improve this participation, the Trump administration should work towards a standard national agreement that reimburses local governments in a timely manner for all reasonable expenses and actual costs. In addition, the nation needs to create a single inventory of all hazard resources and shared real-time deployment process that deploys the closest appropriate resources to the scene. We recognize that the U.S. Fire Administration's National Emergency Response Information System will provide that inventory. However, we need to develop a national deployment system to surge resources, often local resources, to a wildfire quickly enough to get it under control. Also, the Federal Emergency Management Agency needs to revise Emergency Support Function 4, the Firefighting Annex. The U.S. Forest Service is still listed as a primary agency, while the USFA has access to nearly 29,000 fire departments and more than 1 million firefighters across the nation. The USFA is best positioned to coordinate the deployment of resources to the scene of an urban or wood fire. The federal government also must build up its wildland firefighting workforce and support capacity. Across the nation, local fire departments are called to respond to fires on federal land because there are not enough federal wildland firefighters. We support legislation like the TIMS Act, H.R. 743, which will address federal wildland fire workforce issues in a comprehensive manner. We are concerned by potential freezes to seasonal federal wildland firefighters and the firing of their support staff at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These support staff play a critical role in planning and implementing wildfire mitigation projects that directly protect communities. In addition, we are concerned about how layoffs to the National Weather Service may affect fire weather forecasts. It's unclear if these recent layoffs will affect the deployment of incident meteorologists who are essential to providing for firefighter safety and reducing the impact of wildfires. If the federal workforce is weakened, local taxpayers will pay the cost of putting out fires on federal lands. We also ask that the federal government allow a greater local role in all phases of preparedness, response, recovery, and planning. Local fire departments should have access to equipment and training to improve their preparedness. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss today's roundtable on the future of wildfire policy. The nation faces a major challenge in responding to the growing intensity of wildfires. We ask that local fire departments be included as partners in meeting this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll now turn to my colleague, Congresswoman Brownlee. I know if you may have to leave, if you have any questions or thoughts you wanted to provide. Thank you for being here for this hearing.
Thank you for that. I think I'm on. I really appreciate all of you being here and certainly listening to my colleagues on the first panel. I represent the 26th Congressional District in California, which is basically Ventura County, if people are familiar with that. But I've been through, since I've been a member of Congress, I've been through the Thomas Fire and the Woolsey Fire, which both were the largest fires in California's history in that moment. Obviously no longer, which is a sad state of affairs. So I certainly understand what folks go through. And actually, we had a big fire recently in my district, the Mountain Fire, which, you know, but then we had the Palisades Fire and the Eaton Fire, so the Mountain Fire didn't get much coverage. But I think about the smaller fires, and I think, Mr. Green, what you were talking about in terms of a recommendation of community getting together, all of the players involved getting together, looking at the risks and the resiliency in terms of moving forward. I think, you know, the more fires we have, I think the more communities are more open-minded about what they can do to prevent that or create that resiliency, I should say. But that educational component is a really important piece, and I think, you know, bringing those communities together and being required to put forward that plan for that community. Every time I walk a fire, you know, the fire chiefs tell me that this could have been avoided, and this could have been avoided, and this could have been avoided if you know, if this neighborhood had done X, Y, or Z. So we've got to put all those cards on the table. I really do. I think one thing that I worry about still are those folks like the Mountain Fire that are too small to really qualify for FEMA funding. You know, they'll say, well, you're you know, SBA money. There's SBA money there. I won't even go into the SBA money side because I've got a few beefs on that. You know, but I worry about those communities, those smaller communities that don't get that kind of assistance. And I've had one of my cities a year or two ago during the atmospheric river rainfalls that we had, completely flooded out a community right before Christmas, you know, in the poorest part of my district, and absolutely no, you know, no help, no assistance, no nothing. You know, I put forward a bill saying we've got to start looking at, we're going to have more of these smaller events, and we've got to, you know, we've got to look at them, and we've got to look at disaster in a different way, and not just this big disaster. Those are important too, and I don't want to discount them, but we're also having smaller disasters in communities across the country that are getting no assistance whatsoever. So I don't really have a question. I'm really have appreciated all of your contributions on this and recommendations, and I think it gives us a lot of food for thought in terms of, I know Mr. Stanton's writing a lot of notes down of legislation that we can begin to put together and move forward. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, and your point is well made. I mean, the smaller events may be smaller in scale, but to those impacted, it is just as devastating as a big event, and they deserve our support just as much. So, Deputy Chief Green, you brought up some good points about the other agencies that help us in this effort. USDA, National Weather Service, both have suffered significant job loss recently because of the decision of the administration to lay off so many key employees. And of course, FEMA itself has had significant, hundreds of employees terminated just last month. So my first question is for Dr. Merrill, as FEMA's former U.S. Fire Administration. How will these firings impact FEMA's ability to prepare for and respond to wildfire disasters?
Well, at present, there are no wildfire policy experts at FEMA. Anyone associated with the wildfire space has been terminated from FEMA headquarters. So the wildfire policy expert that was brought in just in October, a previous chief from Oregon, lots of experience, was terminated within the first realm of firing. So since then, a lot of the wildfire experts that were in the resilience component of FEMA have also departed. So at present, we're at a great deficit at FEMA from a wildfire knowledge base. Now, is Region 9 experienced? Of course they are, but that's in California. Region 6 experienced? Yes, they are, but that's in the Texas region. What are we going to do for the rest of the nation when we have no expertise for resilience building, when we have no expertise for that response and for the cascading after the fact? So there is a deficit in knowledge base. There already is a difference in how FEMA responds to wildfire, not like it does to hurricanes. They're not the same level of expertise at all. And so now that's been cut even more.
Okay, that's pretty stark and important, so I appreciate that. Mr. Duvall, Director Duvall, this happens to be a Democratic roundtable. The White House happens to be led by the Republicans. Don't want you to get too involved in partisan politics, but the facts are the facts. President Trump has repeatedly threatened to withhold disaster aid to California because of political conflicts, political disagreement about how the state of California makes political decision. What impacts have these comments had in Sonoma County, and what would happen if FEMA was not available to help after local and state capacity has been exceeded?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think one of the most important things to remember is that disasters, they don't care who you are. They don't care about your background, your upbringing, your financial status. They just happen, and they're very extremely devastating. That person, that family, that community, that local government, it's their worst day. And a lot of times those fires or those disaster survivors are struggling just to focus on that moment and survive that moment, that hour, and that day. As an emergency manager, emergencies and disasters are not a place for political conflicts. And the mission when we go into our emergency operations centers and we have these disasters and these emergencies is to mitigate the emergency, support the community, support the recovery and the rebuild. These comments, I've had conversations with my executive staff. What if? What if certain parts of FEMA go away? What if we have another 2017 wildfire? What if we have another Kincaid wildfire? What if we have the large earthquake that's out there on the horizon? What does this mean for us? What areas are going to be reduced? What areas are already reduced within FEMA? And what does that mean to the response and the recovery support, both for the local government, the state government, and more importantly, the community and the rebuild? When you look at what FEMA brings to the table, they're a support team, they're a force multiplier. They bring, as you heard earlier, multiple federal agencies to the table to support the community. I would say right now, in the emergency management community, there's a lot of unknowns until that FEMA review committee meets and makes their recommendations. I would say, I would strongly advocate for the members of IEM to have a seat on that council, to have that local government knowledge brought forward. There's a lot of unknowns.
Okay, I appreciate that important testimony. It's the tragic irony that if the suggestion that FEMA can go away because the states can handle it, when the whole point of FEMA is to get involved when the states can't handle it. It's kind of like reinsurance. It's there for when it goes beyond the capacity of a state. So by its very nature, it's there because there are certain disasters that go beyond an individual state's capacity. Mr. Green, do you believe that FEMA offers enough assistance to communities to prevent wildfire damage? Or what can the agency do better?
I'll say it's a start. I think when we're referring to mitigation, firefighters are taught from their earliest part of their career in the fire triangle: heat, fuel, and oxygen. Firefighting is very simple. Take one of those away, fire goes out. We can't take out the oxygen. Very unlikely that we'll be able to do that when it's 80, 100-mile-an-hour winds. We can do public education to reduce the heat source that is the ignition. But it's really where the fuels come into play that FEMA and Congress and all of us, all of our partners, can focus our best effort. It starts with that fuel, because when a fire gains momentum in a natural area, it then can burn into the built environment. The fuels in those natural areas, whether it be ponderosa in Coconino, brush in California, or leaf litter in Virginia, and it has the potential to gain momentum to burn into that built environment. And then what was the fuel, trees were the fuel, houses now become the fuel. So there is great effort that FEMA can help with in that natural environment before a fire, mitigation efforts along those lines, and then also addressing the built environment.
Thank you. My final question is to Supervisor Horstman. We work closely together. Before I was here, I was the mayor of Phoenix, so I'm kind of the mayor of the big city, and Supervisor Horstman represents northern Arizona, and there's a direct relationship between the success in preventing firefighters, managing that fire, and the water quality that we receive down the mountain in Phoenix. So we are directly related to the work that you are doing. The question I had is, what changes would you like to see FEMA make in their incident period determination process to ensure the needs of Arizonans are met? And obviously that refers to the issue of when there's a fire, the impact on flooding and the hit on the community, which may not manifest for a while, but is equally as devastating. That's my microphone. I'll turn.
Yes, and thank you, Congressman. And yes, you understand the importance of communities and the importance that we play together with our neighboring communities. And one of the things we have here in Coconino County, the Congresswoman absolutely said it fabulously. We are a small community up in northern Arizona, and yet these fires that happen to us are extremely devastating and certainly very impactful in terms of our ability and our budgets and our ability to be able to respond. One of the problems that we've had and just experienced recently on 2022, we had tunnel and pipeline. They were devastating fires. They ended up burning 9 watersheds in Coconino County. It increased the water flow by 10 to 30%. And so we had the fires that was devastating enough, but shortly thereafter, we were lucky enough that year to have monsoons. And so when you had that 10 to 30% increase in the flow, we ended up with these neighborhoods that were impacted by the fire, but boy, they were even more impacted by this devastating flooding that occurred. And in this particular case, it happened shortly after the fire. And yet, because it was outside that 72-hour incident period, single incident period, we were not eligible for FEMA funds. Certainly, the money that we spent on fire suppression as well as the flooding response would have exceeded the FEMA threshold had we not had that 72-hour single incident period. So we definitely need to see that changed. As I said, it's instrumental for rural Arizona, for the rural country, across rural America. There's another part of that. When we do, and we are able to receive FEMA monies, we also make sure we can build back based on what exists there now. What exists there before isn't what we are dealing with. So we want to make sure that the monies that is provided will allow for the infrastructure for as it exists after the fire.
That is a really good point, and a good point to end on. I think the common theme is we need smart, comprehensive emergency management in this country that is well organized, and we're prepared for what may come. The issue we didn't cover, but this is a Democratic roundtable, and we got to get out there. But climate change, the effects of climate change, make all of the number of incidents and the magnitude of the incidents greater than ever before, and so the need for the highest quality and best prepared emergency management is needed now more than ever. So thank you for the important testimony. We'll pass it on to our colleagues on the committee, and we hope and pray we can protect FEMA, protect emergency management in the United States of America, and support our fellow Americans during the worst of times. Thank you so much.